Assalamu alaikum, ahlan wa salam fi Noor Riyadh. Good evening and welcome to Noor Riyadh. My name is Shumandra Ghosh. I'm the Artistic Director of Noor Riyadh. Noor Riyadh is the annual festival of light and art, part of the wider public art project, the Riyadh Art Project, which is transforming the city of Riyadh with public art across the whole city. We have in Noor Riyadh 63 different artworks, 33 installations across 13 locations across the city, and also 30 artworks in an extraordinary lone exhibition called Light Upon Light, which is in the King Abdullah Financial District Conference Centre. And part of Noor Riyadh has been to create a celebration of light art. And to do that, we've invited artists from all over the world and from all over the country. And it's a great honor for this third of the Noor Talks to invite two artists and one curator who are key elements of the Noor Riyadh Festival to join us for a talk. It's about inspired by the name of a work by Daniel, which is called, which has the title In Situ. And so I'd like to, first of all, just introduce the artists. Daniel is an artist who has been working in France since the 1960s. He's one of the foremost contemporary artists in the world. And his work is somewhere, I guess, between painting, sculpture, and architecture.
Thank you, Sumantro, and thanks to both Daniel and Munahad to be here with us tonight. Yes, well, when I was invited to be in your team of curators, and one of the sites of that was proposed to us was really this amazing building, this conference center. I immediately thought about. We as a team, I have to say, we thought about Daniel's work because I've known Daniel's work for all of us do, and I've known the work myself, and we had the pleasure of working together for a marvelous project for the Walker not too long ago, and so I thought that would have been the building really claimed Daniel's intervention. And so so it was a very easy choice curatorially. I don't think it was such an easy project for Daniel to take on. He can tell us a little more about it. I don't think it's never easy when you have to take such a big commitment on a thousands meters building. And so I invited Daniel, and what inspired me personally was this project. I mean, I've seen a lot of projects of his project, but really what inspired me personally was the project that he did for the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris a few years ago. And kind of a little bluntly, I actually asked him, okay, how do you see this thing to be not replicated, but can we do something similar here? And of course, Daniel took his own way, which I'd like him to talk more about it. So the work, I'm going to say what the work is titled for the public. The work is titled Colored Triangles by Mirrored for Riyadh, Work in Situ, KAFD Conference Center, Riyadh. And that's the entire title. Here we're seeing a couple of images that are preparatory drawings that Daniel has prepared for in preparation of the work. But I really would like to ask Daniel, when you were invited by me to see to intervene on this building, what was your approach? How did you come up with these configurations? Of course, the triangles are part of the building itself, but how did you come up with all of this?
Okay, good evening first. First of all, I was hoping to come to Riyadh and to do, to start to work looking to the place and around, etc. So by all these health problem, it was it was not difficult, it was just impossible. So I decided to see what can be done, starting with the plans, some images, some video, which they provide. And I must say my first reaction was more or less to say it's absolutely impossible to do something, because it was, when you get the plane and everything for the first time, never seeing that place ever, it seems and looks so complicated. And I was thinking how to get through, how to see what's happening here. So anyhow, it was, to begin with, extremely puzzling and complex and almost, impossible, I must say. So I left the piece, and it was also some urgency in doing the project. But anyhow, I left everything sleeping for a while, and then I get back to the material I was having, and I started to try to see how it was constructed and how these things were working all together. And of course, when you cannot see the thing by your eyes, being almost like 55 years working specifically with a context, with the site, with the people around, etc., for me, since 1 year of total confinement, it's extremely difficult, first of all, and also extremely new. And I must say, I don't know if I will do that forever, working like that, but it's a very interesting experience anyhow. I know also by experience that when you don't see the place where you are, so here it's a building mainly, but it can be an open space, it can be a street or whatsoever, it can even be a room, it's always something your eyes and your perception catch, which no photo, no plan, no video can really show it and show some maybe very interesting details as your eyes can catch. So this is a little frustrating, because I am sure it's certainly existing with this building, and I hope I can see it soon enough to realize what will be eventually the difference between what it is in reality and what is exactly everything I understood from these planes and photograph. So anyhow, after having studying the possibilities, obviously I did a lot of work playing with the transparency, and this since many, many years in very, very different way. I cannot think of any works I did like that, big or small, which can be, except for the use of the light and the use of the color, be close to another work. If you refer to that big piece I did at the Foundation Vuitton, for example, using the full skylights on top of the Gehry Museum, I think the effect from what I can see also in these pictures there and what seems to happen in Riyadh make for me really two different works, more or less on the same principle, with the same tool, but extremely different, almost difficult to even compare, except for what I said, transparency, projection of light. So of course, even if I never been to Riyadh, I have been in that area in the world already, and I know that the light is something absolutely unbelievable, and the quality of the sky, etc. So that it was not really necessary to be there to know it's something very interesting to work, especially in such a place.
I can say, I mean, I saw your work also in the Bois de Boulogne at the Louis Vuitton, One of the things that's extraordinary about the piece here is that it's actually, at first glance, I think it's deceptively simple. I think someone looking at it would think there's a complexity there. But this is one of the few works we have in the festival where it's very much a piece of the daylight and the night. So, and we were talking earlier on with Emilia Kabakov and Lulu Al-Hamoud in a previous talk, and one of the things that came up was this idea of the sky in this country, in this region, how in some ways it's closer. And one of the things that happens when you walk into the building, and I would encourage anyone who's here in Riyadh, the festival opens during the nighttime from 6 p.m. But the exhibition that we have is in the conference center is open during the day from 11 a.m. And I really would encourage you to come during the day to experience this work, because it is a work of incredible beauty, of joy and serenity. And it is an extraordinary experience. It's been done with, on the surface, seems like a quite kind of simple principle. But I think, as you're saying, it's actually very, very complex in how you've had to arrange not just the place where the triangles are placed, but the translucency, the color, the organization of the color. So that's I think the way the work is experienced. And I felt that it was as if the work has been made for the building. Clearly, the building was there before, but in some senses, I feel like the building was made for the work. It belongs so closely to that. Is that something you felt, Vincenzo? This because you worked closely on this project with Daniel for a year.
Absolutely. Of course, as a curator, I can't really, it was, for me, it was a sort of an obvious idea. But of course, then when I talked to Daniel about it, Daniel said, well, it's not that easy. It's not that direct that, that this would not necessarily work for every building. And the building is already very much, architecturally speaking, it's very much, it's a signature architecture. So it has already a very strong identity. And so that was, I think, something that, needed to be taken into account from my part. On the other end, when Daniel realized the project after a while, then I agree with you that really looked like the work not only belonged to the conference center, but the conference center was built around the work, and not vice versa. So I clearly see that, even though from a distance, that's absolutely my feeling as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to bring in Mohammed now. The title of this talk, it's really a frame to hang it on, was site-specific placing public art. And it was this idea of how we use the space. And this is something that your work has very much, your body of work, a lot of it does engage in very strong senses with the space and with the landscape, or with the buildings in which the work is actually placed. In Noor Riyadh, we have your work, The Mindship Exodus, I think it must be the first time that one artist, that we've had group shows in this large space, Jax 1 in Diriyah. And thank you, by the way, to the Diriyah Gate Development Authority for working with us on the spaces there, and also in At-Tarif Heritage District, where we have another extraordinary site-specific work. But Mohammed, you've taken the whole of the space of what is a very large building.
Initially, when we were developing the kind of intervention in Jax, it started off by being in the corner of Jax and sharing the space with 3 other artists. As kind of space changed and this kind of adaptive approach to responding to the location, you said, would you respond to the entire space if that was available? And I really kind of, it was an important moment when the work really started to develop even further from where we had it initially. And I actually did exhibit in the same building in its inaugural exhibition in 2019.
2019, yeah, the From Within exhibition. I remember seeing your work there.
Yeah, and I went from from the corner to kind of being able to respond to the entire space. It was very surreal.
Now, I remember, paradoxically, this work started, one of the concepts behind it started quite small, because I remember visiting you in your studio, which actually is a remarkable space. It's like a kind of a factory, a laboratory. It's also something of a menagerie with all the cats you have there. And we were visiting with some international artists. I think maybe Dan Rosegaard was with us, who's also in the festival. And you took us out into the yard and you took a small handful of wire wool and burned it. And as it burns in a particular way. And that was also part of the starting point of this work. Am I right?
It was a kind of a fascinating material in its kind of organicness, yet being something metallic, a little bit industrial, and kind of this mimicry of the mind and a neural connection was kind of very interesting. So I started that. Sometimes things begin either from a concept or from the material experience, and it kind of allows for things to develop and take shape. So in this case, this kind of material and this relationship with fire kind of took me down this path, linking this idea of fire and a neural activity within the brain.
And this is now a view of the actual work in the daytime. So this is also a piece that has a great presence during the daytime. As well as at nighttime, but at nighttime it kind of lights up as if it's on fire, and I think that also links very well with our idea, with our theme of the festival, which is under one sky, and that theme came out of the idea of exploring why people look at light art, and by extension why people look at light. The humans have a mystical relationship with fire. It's a universal relationship. We also have a mystical relationship with the sky and the sun. Obviously, it brings us life. And in your case, Daniel, that I think is expressed with the sense there's almost something of that wonder of being under a starry sky when you're in the conference center with these beautiful colors. And I think there is also that mystical relation with the fire and the light of fire that you find in your work, Mohammed.
Yes, and I specifically here, I wanted to explore light as a state of mind, considering, our, past experiences here, growing up in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of restrictions on creativity and expression in the past, and the change we're experiencing today in terms of opening up culturally and, artistically, is kind of interesting, because this idea of the darkness of the mind versus this kind of inner light that keeps the imagination and creativity going, even in the face of being told you can't. So this work is an expression of, the mind ablaze with ideas and refusing to be extinguished.
Yeah, and the work also seems to refer to some kind of distant future as well as perhaps a past. I mean, it could be there. It could be something. Some landscape. There is something of the sort of science fiction about it, of the kind of I don't think maybe post-apocalyptic people might call it that. I think there's more of a positivity there. We're looking here at the actual material. Could you just tell us a bit about this material, because it's a really interesting material you're using here?
It's actually wire scrap from tires. So it's once tires are shredded. As part of a recycling action, they result in little wires of steel. Who knew the tires were actually full of wire and steel? So this material, again, it seems organic. It seems like it's just earth or it's dormant. But once it's exposed to light, whether it's natural light or projection in this case, it does really light up in a fascinating way.
Absolutely. And looking at the picture we have on the screen now, I think the color is quite important. And for me, that sort of brings me back actually to talk to Daniel, because I think, Daniel, your work in color has been driven by what has some commentators have called it a minimalistic approach. It's certainly an approach that's using simple flat color that comes out of the idea of painting. But it seems over the years to have become much more complex in your work.
The base, it's even still in use for myself today, like to play with color, which I always thought was, if not the most, at least one of the few very, very, very important element in visual art altogether. And for many reasons, including the fact that it's maybe the only element in all the thousands of possibilities to make an object or to make something. Let's say we will speak about visual art, which cannot be explained, cannot be said. The color has this characteristic, you cannot describe it. It's only and mainly visual. So speaking about visual art, I think it's quite interesting to see, of course, not only what we can do with that, but the importance of such material, to speak like that. Anyhow, what I think the color also helped myself, and in fact, what I did for Riyadh, it's in a way, when you start to look to the piece, it's almost an analysis of these very, very strange, at least for myself, type of architecture, which I think it's unique. I never saw a building built like that from the bottom to the top and all around. And then what was certainly difficult, not to be right there to see and maybe to catch a little faster the way it's done. The very first approach is the fact that it's extremely complicated and extremely bizarre, and you don't see even if it's any links between one place to another. So you have the same thing at once, something more or less repetitive, but also with no end and no beginning and not really easy to read. But in fact, when I started to think, what can I do with such a place, the color helped me to analyze completely the way the building is built. And not immediately, but with some work, I think I realized totally how the architects did the building. And then you see a lot of construction within this huge triangle, the way the smaller triangle are inside each of these big triangle have a very, very precise structure and also a precise number. So I have no idea if these numbers have any relation with anything, which in fact I am curious to know, but I don't really care. But I saw these numbers are really the key point about the full construction and how many they are, how many, for example, lay of triangles you find in each of these triangles, which have not all the same size. And I think what I did try to do after that, all the effect, visual effect, the fact of the projection of the light, which of course I just saw two pictures, but I can really imagine must be just amazing in such a cover when the sun is there. So you will see pieces of color everywhere, of course, and not anymore outside, not anymore only inside the structure. These, if you follow the color, you will just like that, looking to one triangle, to a second big triangle, and to another one in another part of the building, you will, I think, understand how the architects build the full thing. and then you will see a kind of a very, very interesting game about the structure, and then about the way the triangles, which sometimes are based on the base or the point on the base. So all that, of course, is first confusing, and all of a sudden become very clear and almost extremely calculated. And
Daniel?
The effect of the color, without speaking about the effect anyone can have, and that can be totally personal. It's not with any message from myself about my taste of color, from color.
Daniel, I'm interested in knowing if we bring the images back into the for the public. I want to ask you a couple of questions specifically about what you're talking right now, because what you're trying to describe is how you selected the order of the colors, because it seems rather, if people look at the images, it seems rather casual, but actually there's a very precise structure that actually was overly complicated by the fact that these small triangles. So for the public, I want to just give a little of a context. So the building is made of these very big triangles, and each of the triangles is made of several small triangles. But the tricky part of the building is also that there's some screens that cover some of the triangles. So it's not just glass, but it is glass and also those white screens that cover for obvious reasons of the light beams getting into the building, kind of covers some of the part of the building to get some shades. So you had to come up with a kind of order that in your case would make sense. So can you explain how did you start that process? Because you were addressing that, but I would be interested if you can explain to the public, because sometimes we see two triangles of the same color being next to each other, but what is the progression of it?
I mean, basically the color I pick up are put from the face. I call the face the outside part of the triangle, from left to right by the English alphabetical order. So if it was in French, this order will be different in German, and it was quite difficult to make it with the time we were having and the complexity, in a way, of the translation. But of course, I wanted to do it in Arabic language, and everyone was more or less thinking in English it will be completely correct to do it also. So this is the base, and so they are like that from the alphabetical order A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. They are, I think, I don't even remember, I think it was 8 color, and they repeat themselves systematically from the beginning to the end. And the beginning is always taken from the base. So, for example, the photo we see, we can really see the base of the triangle. And right to this middle part of the photo, for example, you see that the triangle, which is just next to this one, the base is upside down.
Yes.
And this game, it's working everywhere. And from the architecture point of view, never the same way. But I always use the same way to attack such an image or such a structure. So from
when there is a screen, what did you do when the screen was kind of interrupting the progression?
So I took the full structure as to be, first of all, as you can see, one triangle each two, it's absolutely non-touch.
Yeah.
And this is for very also reason, for a reason I can explain with no problem. It's not because it's looking better or not. It's to always have next to the color any color, the color of the sky. And that also, even there where I think the sky is often extremely blue, but not always. And of course, when the sky might be at one point a little less blue or a little white, then all the color change around. But we have also always a control of the reality of the outside only by the color of the sky, because each two of these triangles are remaining completely intact. And then to speak about the places which are by the architecture not existing as a stained glass or as a glass, I use it by the form without taking care it was a blank. So if it was 1, 2, 3 open and 4th blank, my color were always going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., even if they are not in use. So when you see the triangle on the left part, where you see all this white, I think, concrete blockade of the triangle, they are count as if a color can be there.
Yeah.
Of course, the color is missed, and the next one appear, etc., etc. So it doesn't change the order of the color.
Yes. Thank you. And I'd like to move back to Womhand and ask him a couple of questions. One that I wanted to interject before when we saw the images, but I couldn't, and so I'm gonna go back and ask you something, because I cannot be for COVID restrictions. I couldn't travel, and so I cannot experience the work in person. So one question I had, because of the way the work functions, what is the relationship of the work with the smell, and what is, because burning, of course, this not only a lighting moment, but also the smell is part of it. So what is the experience that people will have when they go into the next to the work?
Well, hopefully they don't smell anything, because if the material was burning, it'd be toxic. So, but it does have its own kind of uniqueness, which, is the nature of the material, and it has this a mix of something that feels like rubber and a little bit metallic, but it's not a very overpowering smell at all. It kind of fits in very naturally into the location of a warehouse.
So the fact that the work would have been toxic if this was really burning was part of the selection of the material itself?
No, the material was kind of selected for this metallic kind of deception, where it's kind of hiding its true nature, and you really may dismiss it from a distance. You may think it's something that you've seen before, or that this is a pile of earth that was just piled in there, but it's actually a very complicated structure that was assembled beneath this material. I think we have a time lapse. So the material itself is hiding its true nature and is kind of inviting you closer to kind of investigate what this is. And it's as Sumi was said in the beginning, it is different experience in the morning when it's naturally lit and there's no projection, and at night it's almost the material that becomes invisible and is lost for this time when it is being projected on.
Yeah, I was interested in how you'd kind of responded to the psychology of the space, actually, Mohammed, because I think the whole district is an industrial district, and it almost, in the same way that we were talking about Daniel's work earlier, it almost sort of belongs there. I mean, you could have, I know that you ordered the material from the actual recycling factory, or where it is that they recycle these things, but it's almost like you found these industrial materials. I mean, you can drive out of where this space is, which has now been developed as an exhibition space, but it was once an industrial warehouse. But you can just drive around the corner and you can imagine you would have found piles of this material just there. So there's an element of it almost sort of living and breathing in the space in this area that you've used.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of sticking to this metallic, whether it's the sculptural pieces, which are made out of steel mesh, or this landscape material, which is a whole landscape of metal wire. I think this kind of sticking, even the structure beneath it being made of steel, and was kind of seemed very important and kind of essential to the process.
And there's a kind of something like a spaceship or something that looks as if it's broken apart. It's in three parts that's sort of sitting on top of this material.
It represents a mind ship, sort of, like these old black and white ink illustrations depicting ships breaking apart in stormy seas. Here we have a mind ship that's trying to navigate a mindscape, dealing with new ideas, struggling with new beliefs, having a debate with what we believe in and how we kind of debate that change. So the landscape is ablaze with this debate and these ideas. And it's a rough journey. Not everybody wants to jump on an adventure the way they think about. We're often quite comfortable within very. Have you lost me?
Wahad, I have one more question, and then probably we have Sumi. We have one for both of them that I know you're interested in knowing more. But for you, Munahad, I would like to people to see your recent work that you presented at Desert X. Speaking of works made in public spaces, I think that it would be nice of you to expand a little bit on that, and if you can say what kind of relationship you think, even though the works are quite different, but what kind of relationship you think the work both in the desert and the one for the festival might have.
I think the a very kind of repetitive theme that happens in my work is taking a singular unit or object, in this case a PVC pipe. In the case of the work at the Noor Festival, the Mindship Exodus, a single wire of steel, and that kind of representative of a thought, and how it may be seen as insignificant, but it can lead. Growing up in schools here, teachers used to tell us to strike a line through the neck of characters we were creating, for me as a young illustrator who wanted to tell stories, this was kind of an attack on my imagined world. So from a young age, I really decided to wield the line to create and not to decapitate. And this kind of realization, if you will, this obsession to repurpose the line sculpturally. So this work that you see in Desert X is a sculptural sketch, an expression of an adventure, and the will to continue to create. So the link again is this taking of something that is a simple element like a line, ink on paper, or a PVC pipe, or a wire strip. But when you wield it in number and you are insistent on it to exist in a different way, it becomes undeniable and it takes shape in ways that can't be denied.
This is a fascinating area of common ground, I see, in some ways, because, of course, Daniel, your work also takes kind of singular units and uses process to repeat them. So I think that's, am I right in saying, Daniel, that your work kind of emerged at a time when other artists were also thinking about taking simple singular units and using process to repeat them?
Yeah, with no doubt, it's something which is current. It's I think when it's interesting, it's always because the way to use such repetitive structure or objects or something like that as a kind of interest to say something with all the environment, all the rest, etc., etc. So I will not be able to speak too much about the people who has sometime what the people can call a sign or something repetitive in the work. I can certainly speak a little bit about the one I use since so long. I mean, it's almost 57 years or something like that. And I have to say too that even if this element, which I called a visual tool, even if this tool is still always somewhere very, very visible or not so visible within a total kind of work, I never knew I will use that, let's say 2 years after I started, and when it was even more repetitive than it became. And for some reason, using it, everything changed with the same element, which for me has the basic interest to relate any kind of work I can do with another one I did or I will do. And this kind of visual connection can make possible to read something, not to say that every work I am doing is totally new, but when something is really new or even contradictory to a previous work, this use of this visual tool repeated, and I forgot to say, it's always since so long the same measure, because this is the characteristic. It's really the same measure. I can use it in a book, very small. I can use it in 400 meters square in a wall or in the street when it's even a kilometer. So whatsoever the size where you can see it, it's always exactly the same. And so this very standard element, which is also maybe not completely for the people in the art world today, because they might recognize who use it, but anyhow, it's a very, very banal tool. It's very neutral. It's make no sense if you just see it like that. Gives the possibility to recollect by your memory or sometime by the space which is between two works, two very different kind of works. So for me, this is why I am still using it and why I found it interesting. But in fact, when you look to what I did in Riyadh, these elements are only showing or reinforcing the look of the doors. So that's the only place where you can see a series of black and white stripes.
The stripes, yeah.
Of course, they play something very simple, like a signal, where is the entrance, and nowhere else.
Yeah, and I think it's a great moment actually in Noor Riyadh. The festival has always been about connection with the world and connection with the artists and connection with different generations of artists. And so it's a wonderful feeling to walk into that building and feel a connection to your earlier works. And in that same building, we have the Light Upon Light exhibition, where we have works by, for example, Nancy Holt, who's also working with the gallery space and using light to modify the gallery space, and James Turrell and Yaya Kusama and a number of these artists. So there's a kind of connection made there with an art history that I think is a very important one. We have about 10 minutes left, and we're starting to get some questions coming in online. And I just wanted to ask, there's a question for you, Mr. Björn. What do you mean by the work? It means to work in situ. And of course, this, as I said right at the beginning, the idea of site-specific or in situ, this was the inspiration for the kind of main theme of tonight's talk. So that was a question for you, and I had also questions come in for Mohammed. So if you could, can you answer that one first, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. Very, very quickly. I mean, in situ, it's it's a Latin words which are in the French language to begin with. So in France, we can use that for many different things. Speaking about in situ, it's the same type of used of old Latin expression like in vivo, statu quo. I mean, we have a lot of words which are absolutely the original words from Latin. So in situ means, of course, then now it's my, not to say my explanation, but the way I understood and I play with this two word in situ means that the work is done in the site where the people are going to see it, including the people who work there, not only to speak about the architecture or the landscape or wheresoever the work can be done. And of course, mean also that the work cannot be transported, so it's really in situ, and the work might disappear either after an exhibition, and we know it's 2-3 months, 2 weeks, or 1 day, or remaining a longer time if it's starting to be a permanent piece in a museum or outdoor. And the life of the work, whatsoever the life of this work, makes the work out of the game when the work disappears by force or by natural decaying. So this term is it's really large, and I want to say that of course it's including also the time, and also without at all forgetting that it's using completely at least the people who are working with me when I do something, especially in the urban place where I'd never do the thing by myself with my hand alone. So the people who invite me, the exchange we have and all that are all getting to this notion of in situ, which make a big break, for example, but it's not to say for that reason it's either better or worse, but a big break with the general ideology of the Western art works and art world, which, as we know, play this historical and ideologic position of the work being a piece of art is completely independent. It's something by itself. And let's say, when I said the work is in situ, it's immediately indicating that my work is not alone. My work is not just a good you can put someplace else, whatsoever the quality of this work. So this is an important thing. My work has no, in a way, we can even go further, my work has no autonomy. It's always belonging with something, and most of the time, the something in question has nothing to do with what I am doing. And finally, they are totally together, and so it's why it's also difficult to speak. When you speak with words, I usually said, this is my work, but my work means also a lot of things which are not mine.
Yeah. So, well, it feels already like your work in this case belongs to the city. You know, it belongs to Riyadh now, and but it does. I guess it is a site-specific work. It's temporary. It's going to, in the future, exist in the memory, just as Mohammed's work at Desert X exists now as a memory. It's no longer there. We also, that was an interesting, we were talking, I think earlier, we touched upon the idea of the title. So you very, very clearly now explained, Daniel, your title. And I wanted to go to Mohammad actually and ask about the title of your work, because do the titles come first, or do you start on the work and they emerge later?
I think the title is often for me this moment of eureka as you are reading the story of the work. And in a lot of the things I do under this kind of approach of responding to a site in situ is to plan up to a point. I often do frustrate the people I work with. I'm often responding and changing as I construct the work, because I don't want to exactly know the ending of the story. I want to be surprised when the work is finished, much like reading a good book. So the process for me has a lot of planning, which allows for a lot of change in the process of making. Even as I move into scale, I'm trying to maintain that kind of spirit, and that exists even with the titling and, things can change. The work continues to change even after the opening has happened. Even after the openings happened, it continues to evolve in my mind, and I'm questioning the color, and maybe I should change this, maybe I should continue to work. And so it never really ends, and I'm forcibly asked to stop and let this project go. So there's a kind of a continuation that goes on even after the work is finished, but it always happens within the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating thing about art that it changes even after it's completed, and even hundreds of years later, it actually changes. We've just got time to just get this one question that came in from Federico, who was actually asking you, Mohammed, of what it feels like to exhibit in Riyadh.
It's quite. We say humbling a lot, but growing up here and never really imagined that we would be here and we would be kind of recognized and allowed to exhibit and to express. It's very exciting, and I moved back because of these opportunities and this kind of support we're having right now. So it's something I definitely do not take for granted every day.
Well, I can say from my personal perspective, it's a great honor for me to be working with the Royal Commission for Riyadh City, and the ambition for culture and art in this country is extraordinary, and this new generation of artists here, and the creativity and the passion is really an extraordinary thing in this country, and it's been a great pleasure to be working on to realize what is a festival of light art, but actually just a festival of art. Really, this is the main thing. So I need to just tell our listeners, if you are in Riyadh, the festival goes on until the 3rd of April. The Light Upon Light exhibition runs until the 12th of June. A number of our exhibits you do have to book online. There are free tickets, but you need to book online because of COVID restrictions. But we are actually open every day between 6 p.m. And 1 a.m. Daniel Buren's extraordinary work is at the conference center in the King Abdullah Financial District, and that, as I mentioned, is also visible during the day. And as you mentioned earlier, Daniel, you've got people. There are offices there. There's a cinema there, as well as our exhibition. So people coming and going all the time and experiencing that work in the daytime, that then is actually transformed at night as well. And fairly shortly, we'll also have the Noor Riyadh catalogue, which will be available if you're actually in Riyadh. So I hope you can get hold of a copy of that. And so just in closing, I really wanted to say a big thank you to our international curatorial consultant, Vincenzo de Bellis, to artists Daniel Buren and Mohammed Shonno. It's been a great pleasure to hear your insights into the creation of your work, and it's even greater pleasure that you're participating in the Noor Riyadh Festival this year. So I'd like to thank all of you, and thank you also to all of the teams that have worked on Noor Riyadh to realize the festival, which only opened yesterday. And if you're in Riyadh, please do come and visit. And thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.